Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding this very important hearing. I kind of start with this discussion by saying your grandfather's power lines are not fit, were for your grandfather's weather events. And what we have to have is a modern system of power lines to deal with today's weather events. And this morning, I introduced legislation to begin the modernization of America's power infrastructure so that we can deal with these horrendous weather events that we have been seeing around the country. Oregon saw a once-in-a-century windstorm last fall that just ignited horrible wildfires. We just had massive power outages in our state. I spent days in a dark basement, and members of Congress are able, after a few days, to get up and get on with their lives. But we had a lot of Oregonians who had been hurting even before this happened, and now they're in even worse shape. So this is a huge matter of public safety as well as a jobs issue, a climate issue, and my legislation creates incentives for the private sector to step up and put in place those more modern systems so that we can deal with today's blackouts and wildland fires. And this means everything from strengthening utility poles and power lines, undergrounding equipment when possible, and cleaning brush and hazard trees. So my question is for Mr. Wood, the former chairman of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Mr. Wood, as you heard me say, grandfather power lines, okay for grandfather weather, not fit for today. And so I introduced legislation to update the system. We would make available funds for agencies like power marketing at Bonneville and utilities to install some of the changes that I'm talking about, underground power lines and strengthening overhead lines and installing equipment to monitor the grid during the serious weather. What do you think of something like this? And what kind of additional funding do you think would be necessary to harden the power grid, especially in rural areas?
Nice to see you again, Senator Wyden. I cannot emphasize enough how the importance, the robustness of an infrastructure at both the local distribution level and up at the transmission level is for the future. The impact of severe changes in the weather that we've all lived through. And actually, I was so busy with our own outages in Texas, I wasn't aware of what y'all had gone through in Oregon. That was quite substantial. I think that the hardening of the infrastructure has a cost, and that is always, from my regulatory mindset, the tussle that we have to do. With the larger utilities, it's easier to recover that cost over a large area. I've been a big fan of recovering transmission costs over the RTOs or the larger areas. I know we don't have those in the West yet, but that's been a great way to pay for big transmission. But the rural areas are oftentimes in co-ops or small utilities that don't have the ability to really internalize the broad costs just within their company. And so that is, I understand that your bill attempts to address some of that through cost-sharing mechanisms. I think we can't leave rural America behind. I think we've learned during COVID we can't do it on broadband, but we have never been able to do it on electrification since we fixed that issue a century ago. And it's no different today. You're right. It's not the grandfather's lines, but we've got to keep it 21st century for all of America, and starting with the rural aspects that you're talking about in your bill make a lot of sense to me.
Well, thank you, and we've appreciated your input, over the years, and that's the whole point of the $10 billion matching grant program for organizations like Power Marketing Administrations, that's Bonneville, because there are going to be some costs associated with this. But to me, there are also huge costs if we do nothing, and we saw that all over the country, whether it's Texas, whether it's Oregon, we've seen it all over the country. Same question for you, Mr. Gabriel, with respect to funding for the types of activities that I just outlined. Do you think that'd be very useful? Is that something we can build on?
Absolutely. Certainly any type of non-reimbursable funding that we could get to help bolster the system. Keep in mind, we already put $160 million or so every year in the WAPA system. Of course, the challenge, as Mr. Wood said, is most of WAPA's customers, many like BPAs, are very small municipals, co-ops, and rural folks. So it's adding a significant burden to them would be a challenge. But any money that's available, we want to add more sensors. We want to make sure that we are bolstering lines. And something as simple as switching from wood poles to steel is a huge expense, but something that would clearly help grid resilience.
Well, thank you both. And we're going to want your counsel on this. As with a lot of issues, people are going to say, can we afford it? I think when you look at the other side of the coin, you can't afford not to do this. And I appreciate both of you. Thanks for the time, Mr. Chairman.